Welcome, heroes. Have you ever wondered why fear grabs you so easily? Why a single thread, a single alarming headline, can make you stop scrolling, freeze, and listen? Because fear isn't just an emotion, it's a weapon. It shapes decisions, controls crowds, and silently guides your every move. In this episode, we dive deep into the psychology of fear as a persuasion mechanism, uncovering how your mind is wired to prioritize danger, and how that primal instinct is exploited every day in politics, marketing, media, and even your closest relationships. You'll discover how fear captures attention, fuels loyalty, and bends perception, and how you can reclaim control once you see the system behind it. So ask yourself, who really controls your attention? You, or the fear that's been engineered for you? Before we begin this descent into the human mind, subscribe, like, share, and leave your thoughts below. Together, let's expose how fear manipulates and how awareness can set us free. Now let's begin. The psychology of fear, a primal mechanism. You are not broken for feeling fear. You are exquisitely tuned for survival. And the paradox is this: the thing that most limits your life is the same mechanism that once kept your ancestors alive long enough to create it. Let's sit with that for a moment. Fear is not a modern flaw. It is a primal inheritance, older than language, older than the stories we use to explain it. Long before there were calendars or cities, your nervous system was learning a single, urgent lesson. If you miss a reward, you might be hungry. If you miss a threat, you might be gone. That one truth shaped the brain in ways we still feel every day. When something looks like danger, your attention leans forward as if pulled by a magnet. The world narrows, colors sharpen, sounds rise. Your stomach tightens, your muscles prepare, and a small almond-shaped region deep in your brain, the amygdala, lights up like a watchman ringing a bell at midnight. That bell is not asking your permission. It does not consult your calendar. It simply acts, because speed is the difference between safety and regret. This is why fear often feels faster than thought. The amygdala receives rough, rapid input about what you see and hear and can trigger a cascade. Adrenaline, heart rate, breath shift. Before your slower, more reflective system fully understands what is happening. Think of it as a two-lane road in your mind. One lane is fast, automatic, and ancient. It carries reflexes and instincts. The other lane is slow, careful, and reflective. It carries analysis, stories, and plans. Fear travels in the fast lane. It cuts the line, not because it is rude, but because your biology decided long ago that it must. The brain runs on a strict economy of attention. Limited energy, limited time, unlimited signals. In that economy, threats are VIPs. They get priority seating. Everything else waits in the lobby. You feel this when a notification with a worrying tone pulls you out of a meaningful moment, when an ambiguous text from someone you care about hijacks your focus, when a creak in the night makes you forget the page you were reading. Your brain is not searching for joy first. It is scanning for danger. This is not pessimism, it's efficiency. Imagine our ancestors on a savanna. If they paused to admire the sunset while ignoring the rustle in the grass, their genes didn't make it to the next day. The ones who survived were those whose minds were biased toward caution. You are the child of their caution. You may not like it. You may wish you were bolder. But you are here because fear did its job. Yet fear, the helpful guard, easily becomes a noisy tyrant. The same alarm that gets you moving can drown out the quiet voice of reason. When the amygdala rings the bell, your rational thought, the prefrontal cortex, often gets sidelined. Complex thinking takes time and energy. Fear demands speed and certainty. It says, act now, explain later. So you find yourself making choices you don't fully agree with, avoiding conversations you need to have, saying yes when every part of you wants to say no. Later, when the surge calms, your reflective mind returns and wonders, why did I do that? There is no shame in this. It's simply what happens when the fast lane outruns the slow one. Understanding this does not make fear vanish, but it does restore your dignity. You can witness your biology at work without collapsing into it. Imagine fear as a smoke detector in your house. overly sensitive, occasionally shrieking when toast burns, but invaluable when something truly catches fire. You do not smash the detector to get rid of the noise. You check the kitchen, open a window, lower the heat. Likewise, with fear, you acknowledge the signal, then verify the source. Is this a tiger, or is it toast? Is this a real hazard, or a mental habit? The moment you ask, you begin shifting attention from reflex to reflection. The amygdala may ring the bell, but you decide how long it rings. The evolutionary roots of fear also explain another quiet truth. We notice potential losses more than equivalent gains. A possible loss feels heavier in the hand. This is the brain's ancient accounting system. If you find a fruit, you can search again tomorrow. If you lose your life, there is no tomorrow. So in daily life, loss casts a longer shadow than reward. We replay criticisms longer than compliments. We remember betrayals more sharply than favors. We anticipate what could go wrong before we celebrate what could go right. This bias is not cynicism. It is the residue of survival. But left unchecked, it narrows our world until nearly everything looks like a cliff. So how do we live wisely with fear, neither denying it nor being ruled by it? We begin with language. Say what is true. Something in me feels threatened. Not I am a coward. Not the world is doomed. But something in me is ringing the bell. That small sentence makes a vital distinction. You are not the alarm. You are the house that contains it. From there, bring the body into the conversation. Fear is physical. Breathe lower and slower than the impulse suggests. Lengthen the exhale. Your heart will follow your lungs' lead. When the body softens, the mind can enter the room. Then ask a simple, gentle question. What is the actual threat? Not the imagined pile of worst-case scenarios, but the concrete risk in front of you. You do not have to fix everything. You only have to see clearly. Clarity reveals that fear doesn't only steal focus. It also gives you information. Sometimes it points to a boundary you need to set. Sometimes it points to a preparation you've been avoiding. Sometimes it points to an old wound dressed up in new clothes. And sometimes it is simply the cost of being alive and caring. You fear because you value. The parent fears because they love the child. The artist fears because they love the work. The leader fears because they love the people who depend on them. If you trace fear back far enough, you often find devotion. That is worth remembering when you're tempted to hate your fear. It might be protecting the very thing you cherish. And yet, we also know how easily fear can be used against us. Because the brain prioritizes threat signals, the loudest message often wins the race to attention. Headlines learned this. Politics learned this. Scammers learned this. Act now or lose everything is the voice of system designed to bypass your reflection and trigger your reflex. The antidote is not numbness, it is discernment. When you feel urgency swell, pause and ask, who benefits from my fear? If the answer is not your safety or your integrity, step back. The same biology that kept your ancestors alive deserves your protection from manipulation. Give your amygdala better leadership, your values, your long view, your steady breath. It helps to practice with small things. Notice how quickly your mind invents a threat from uncertainty. A delayed reply, a tight look on someone's face, a plan that changes. Catch the story in the act of writing itself. They must be angry. This will fall apart. I'm already failing. Hold those sentences up to the light. Are they signals from the world, or echoes from an old corridor in your mind? You do not need to bully yourself into calm. Curiosity is stronger than force. A curious mind invites the prefrontal cortex back online. It widens the tunnel vision. It reminds you that reality is larger than the alarm describes. In this way, fear becomes not a prison, but a teacher. It tells you where your edges are. It tells you where you still confuse the past with the present. It tells you what matters enough to scare you. Sometimes it tells you to step back. Sometimes it asks you to step forward with care. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is the decision that something else is worth more. When the watchman rings the bell, you approach with the lamp of attention, not with a hammer, not with denial. You ask for details. You choose your next step, You keep your dignity. So tonight, as you move through the rooms of your life, listen for the bells without letting them become the only music. When fear cuts the line, acknowledge it, breathe, and let your wiser self re-enter the conversation. You were built to survive, yes, but you were also built to understand, to love, to create, to choose. The same brain that once scanned the grass for tigers can scan your day for meaning. And the same heart that speeds with danger can slow with trust. Take one small moment tomorrow to practice. Hear the alarm. Check the kitchen. Open a window. Lower the heat. Then return to your meal, your work, your loved ones. Fear has done its part by knocking. You do your part by answering with presence. In that meeting, you are no longer at war with yourself. You are at home in your own house. And from that home, you can move through a world that still contains risks and still holds beauty. A world where your attention belongs not only to what might hurt you, but also to what can help you grow. The shortcut of attention. How fear bypasses logic. Your mind is not a courtroom. It is a doorway. What enters first shapes the story, and fear knows how to arrive before reason even ties its shoes. Let's begin with what it feels like. A headline flashes red. A message pings with urgency. A shadow on the wall looks a little too sharp. Before you can think it through, your body is already moving. Breath shortens. Eyes narrow. Your attention snaps like a magnet to the thing that might hurt. This is not a personal flaw. It is the design of a brain built with two rhythms, one fast, one slow. The fast rhythm, what psychologists often call System 1, works like a reflex. It is quick, emotional, automatic, and always on. The slow rhythm, System 2, is deliberate, patient, and careful, but it requires effort. You could think of System 1 as the smoke detector and System 2 as the fire marshal. One screams, the other investigates. But when fear is in the room, the smoke detector gets the microphone first. Fear is the perfect System 1 trigger. It uses simple signals, loud sounds, sharp angles, sudden changes, strong words, to pull your attention without asking for permission. It does not need full context or clear evidence. It does not wait for data. It is tuned for speed, not accuracy. That is why threats feel urgent even when they are abstract. The brain treats uncertainty like a potential cliff. Could, might, and maybe are enough to make your nervous system lean forward as if the edge were already under your feet. If a story hints at danger without proving it, a part of you prepares anyway. In that tiny gap between hint and proof, fear can steer behavior. This happens because the brain manages energy like a frugal accountant. Careful thinking eats fuel. It takes time and glucose to weigh options, gather sources, compare facts, and build a measured judgment. Reflexive fear, on the other hand, is cheap. It runs on pattern recognition and simple rules. Loud equals important, unfamiliar equals unsafe, urgent equals act now. Neurologically, fear consumes fewer mental resources than reason because it uses short, well-worn paths, fast sensory routes to emotional centers, while logic recruits wider circuits that integrate memory, language, and executive control. If attention is a limited budget, fear writes the smallest check for the biggest reaction. That is efficient, but it also means the cheapest bidder can win your mind. You can see this everywhere in daily life. Consider breaking news. The alerts are designed like fire alarms, colors that signal heat, tones that slice through quiet, words that compress a complex world into a single emotional command. Breaking, crisis, emergency, alert. Your System 1 wakes, heart tapping faster, eyes locked to the screen. The content might be incomplete, evolving, or even wrong, but the form is already doing its work. By the time System 2 arrives to ask careful questions, you are 3 stories deep, feeling the sharpness of danger as if it were at your door. This is not because you are naive. It is because your biology is loyal to survival. It would rather make 100 false alarms than miss the one true fire. Clickbait uses the same doorway. It does not try to convince you with balanced reasoning. It hints at a threat to trigger that fast rhythm. This common household item is poisoning you. The one financial mistake that will ruin your retirement. Doctors hate her for this. The structure is a promise of risk wrapped in mystery. Your mind fills the gaps with worst-case images, and the curiosity is not neutral. It is laced with fear. System 1 leans forward, and your thumb obeys. Only later, after the page loads, does System 2 whisper, "Wait, did we need this?" By then, attention has already been spent. Viral panic is the group version of this pattern. A rumor spreads about a shortage, a new law, a dangerous product, an invisible threat. You see friends reposting it with urgency, and your nervous system reads the social proof as danger proof. Empty shelves and a photo become a prophecy. You act, not because you have confirmed the facts, but because uncertainty plus urgency equals movement. The brain evolved in tribes where ignoring group alarm was costly. Today, that wiring meets the speed of networks, and anxiety scales faster than truth. Again, this is not because people are foolish. It is because fear travels on a simpler, faster network inside the skull and across the world. If we zoom in to the inner experience, we notice how fear changes the way we think, not just what we think about. System 1 simplifies. It prefers sharp contrasts, safe versus unsafe, friend versus enemy, now versus never. It pushes for action and discourages nuance. System 2 loves nuance, but it is slow, and fear lowers the light it needs to work. Under threat, we use shorter sentences in our mind. We reach for familiar stories. We loop. We treat questions as problems to close rather than mysteries to explore. The mind makes a small tunnel and calls it the whole world. This is useful when the stove is on fire, but not when the danger is hypothetical or manipulated. And manipulation is exactly what industries learn to scale. News organizations compete for limited attention, and the quickest way to win the auction is by evoking risk. Platforms optimize for clicks and watch time, and fear keeps eyes on the page. Even well-meaning communicators fall into the trap because urgency feels responsible. If the brain prioritizes threats, the message that acts like a threat gets a head start. None of this requires a conspiracy. It only requires a shared incentive, fear converts. In that economy, the most alarming content often rises, while the careful, measured voice arrives late and tired. But we are not powerless in this. The first step is to understand the handoff between systems. When you feel the sharp pull, heart rate up, shoulders tight, a need to act immediately, name what is happening inside. System 1 is driving. That simple sentence creates a moment of distance. Then, without shaming yourself, invite the slower rhythm back into the room. Lengthen your exhale. Ask a short, honest question. What is the actual risk to me right now? If the answer is unclear, buy yourself time. Time is oxygen for System 2. Even a 20-second pause can be enough to change the path of attention. In practice, this means editing your environment the way you would edit a diet. Reduce the constant alarms that keep your reflexes wired. Turn off non-essential notifications. Read full articles instead of headlines. When something feels urgent online, check whether it would still be urgent after a glass of water and a walk around the room. If a message tries to rush you, act now or else. Notice who benefits from your speed. Real emergencies exist, but so do artificial ones designed to borrow your biology for profit. It also means practicing with safer examples, so your nervous system learns the pattern without shame. Notice the small moments you catastrophize. A delayed reply becomes rejection. A minor ache becomes disaster. A market dip becomes ruin. Don't fight the thought like an enemy. Meet it like a messenger, carrying a poorly drawn map. Thank it for the warning, then redraw the map with specifics. What I know. What don't I know? What would change this? This engages the circuits of reflection. Over time, your mind learns that it can hear an alarm without evacuating the building. There's a gentle truth underneath all of this. Fear is trying to serve you. It is not the villain of your life. It is the part that wants you to keep breathing tomorrow. The problem is not that fear speaks. It is that we give it the only microphone. Wisdom is not silence of fear, but orchestration. You let System 1 do what it does best, detect, warn, prepare, while calling System 2 to do what only it can, Contextualize, prioritize, and choose. When the two work together, attention becomes a disciplined light rather than a spotlight that anyone can grab. So as you move through this week, watch the doorways of your attention. Notice what arrives first and how it colors the room. When a headline tries to sprint inside, meet it at the threshold. When a rumor knocks with urgency, ask it to show its ID. When your own thoughts start to draw cliffs where there are only curbs, slow down, look closely, and step with care. You cannot stop fear from knocking, but you can decide who gets to live in your mind. And tonight, before you sleep, consider one quiet question. If fear did not rush you, what would you give your attention to? The answer will not erase danger from the world, but it will remind you that your life is larger than the loudest voice. In that remembering, the doorway widens. System 1 still protects you. System 2 returns to guide you. And you, steady at the threshold, learn to choose not only what keeps you alive, but what makes being alive worth the precious time you have. Loss aversion. Why the pain of losing outweighs the joy of winning. We don't live in a world measured only by what we gain. We live in a world shaped by what we fear losing. The strange truth is this. A single loss can echo louder in the mind than a chorus of wins. Imagine holding a coin in your hand. If heads means you win $100 and tails means you lose 100, most people hesitate or refuse. The math is fair, but the feeling is not. Deep down, the possibility of loss bites harder than the promise of gain soothes. That bite has a name, loss aversion, and it sits at the heart of how humans make choices. Long before we could explain it, our ancestors were living by it. Food gained today is helpful, but food lost today could mean hunger tomorrow. Territory gained is nice, but territory lost could mean danger. A chance missed is disappointing, but risk misjudged might be fatal. Out of these ancient calculations came a psychological rule that still guides us. Protect what you have, because losing hurts more than winning helps. Decades ago, researchers studying real decisions noticed this pattern and built a new way of describing it called prospect theory. It said in plain language that we do not weigh outcomes on a clean scale. We judge them relative to where we stand right now, our reference point, and we react more strongly to changes that take us below that point than to those that lift us above it. Gain 100 and you smile. Lose 100 and you flinch. The flinch is bigger. If you've ever celebrated a raise for a day and remembered a fee for a month, you felt this curve drawn inside your nervous system. The line for joy rises gently. The line for pain drops sharply. This asymmetry bends our choices in quiet ways. We hold on to bad investments because selling would mean admitting a loss in the present, even if logic says we should move on. We keep in used subscriptions because canceling means giving something up, even if we're giving up a cost. We delay hard conversations because we imagine losing comfort now, even if we might gain peace later. In each case, the fear of losing outweighs the hope of winning. The mind whispers, not what will I gain, but what might I lose? And our hands pause. Marketers, politicians, and headlines understand this in their bones, whether or not they use the terms. A message framed around loss slices through attention faster than one framed around gain. Don't miss out feels stronger than here's a benefit. If you don't act now, you'll lose your spot moves us more than. If you act now, you'll get a bonus. The implication of losing a place, a status, a safety net, or an opportunity sparks a defensive energy that pure promise rarely does. Fear-based messages do not need to create new desires. They only need to threaten what we already have, even if what we have is just a feeling of safety. You can watch this bias play out every day in the markets. When prices climb, excitement builds slowly. When prices drop, panic can be instant. A rally lifts spirits, but a sudden fall empties carts. The same numbers in reverse carry different emotional weights. A one-day loss often triggers more trading than the one-day gain of equal size. Investors check accounts more when they're down than when they're up. The screen becomes a window to a storm, and the priority shifts from growth to protection. I can't lose more becomes the story that drives the click. Even seasoned professionals feel the pull, Because loss aversion isn't a beginner's mistake. It's built into the human template. The best learn to see it, name it, and design guardrails that keep a bad day from becoming a bad decision. In politics, loss aversion becomes a megaphone. Campaigns tell voters what they'll lose if the other side wins: jobs, freedoms, safety, identity. The message is not imagine a better future, but imagine what will be taken from you. And because the brain is primed to guard against losses, these warnings bite deep, even when they are exaggerated. It's easier to mobilize people by saying, they're coming for what's yours, than by saying, we'll build something new. The first triggers the shield, the second asks for patience. This is why fear can unify strangers overnight, and hope can take months to organize. The cost is that we begin to see neighbors as threats and compromise as surrender, because loss looms larger than common ground. Health scares tell the same story in a different room. A new study hints at a risk. The headline shouts the loss. We picture losing our health, our time, our loved ones, and the emotion outruns the evidence. We overcorrect, avoiding foods entirely, buying unproven remedies, believing the scariest version, because the possibility of loss feels like a cliff, even when the data shows a bump. We are not foolish for this. We are human. But the result is that cautious curiosity gets replaced by anxious certainty, and our choices are guided more by the fear of harm than by the balance of facts. Experiments that explore loss aversion reveal how deep the bias runs. Offer someone a small gamble with a fair payoff, and watch how they demand more upside to tolerate the same downside, often roughly twice as much. Give people a mug and ask how much money they'd want to give it up, then ask others how much they'd pay to get it. The sellers ask for more than the buyers are willing to offer, even though the mug is the same, because ownership shifts the reference point. Frame a medical procedure as having a 90% survival rate or a 10% mortality rate. The numbers are identical, but the choice feels different, and more people accept the first framing because it avoids the face of loss. In each case, the mind leans away from losing, even if the landscape hasn't changed. If we look inward, we find more personal proofs. Think about the compliment you forgot in a day, and the criticism you still remember from a year ago. Think about how you replay the one thing you said wrong, not the 20 things you said right. Think about the opportunity you didn't take, because you couldn't stand the thought of failing in front of people who matter to you, even though success would have meant growth and pride. These aren't flaws of character. They are the marks of a brain that treats threats as heavier stones on the scale. But if we don't recognize the scale, we start believing its numbers are the truth of the world. They're not. They are the tilt of the instrument. So what do we do with this knowledge, beyond nodding at it? First, we learn to spot loss framing when it arrives, especially in our own thoughts. When you feel urgency rise, ask gently, what am I afraid of losing? Name it: money, status, time, comfort, approval, certainty. Then ask, what might I gain if I act? And what might I gain if I resist? That second question brings balance back to the table, because loss aversion often hides the gains inside stillness and the losses inside avoidance. The job you don't apply for feels safe because you avoid rejection, but you quietly lose the possibility of a better life. The boundary you don't set feels kind because you avoid discomfort, but you quietly lose respect for yourself and from others. Naming these hidden losses helps you see that doing nothing is not neutral. It is a choice with its own price. Second, practice reframing your own decisions in terms of what you protect by moving forward, not only what you risk. If starting a conversation threatens your comfort, it may also protect your honesty. If investing in your skills threatens your savings today, it may protect your stability tomorrow. If letting go of a failing path threatens your pride, it may protect your future. When you connect action to protection of what matters, you speak to the same ancient system that once helped you survive. You are not denying loss aversion. You are recruiting it for your better life. Third, create small experiments where the stakes are modest, but the learning is real. Say yes to a safe challenge that risks mild embarrassment. Sit with the discomfort. Then notice how quickly the pain fades compared to how long the imagined pain lived in your head. Sell a small item you've kept out of habit, and feel the space it frees. Make a tiny investment in a new skill and chart your progress. These are not grand gestures. They're quiet lessons that teach the nervous system that not every loss is a cliff, and not every gain is fragile. Finally, when fear-based messages press on your soft spots, step back and ask, is the loss here real, likely, and mine? Real means it exists beyond the headline. Likely means it's not a remote possibility dressed in flashing lights. Mine means it actually touches your life, not just your tribe's outrage or a stranger's feed. If the loss fails those tests, let the message pass like weather. If it passes, respond with care, not panic. The difference between the two is the difference between a life led by alarms and a life guided by values. As you end this chapter, take a slow breath and remember, your mind is not wrong for fearing loss. It is loyal. But loyalty needs leadership. You can honor the part of you that protects what you have while still opening the door to what you might become. Ask yourself tonight, in one corner of your life, if I were not afraid of losing, what would I choose? Then ask the second kinder question. What precious thing would that choice actually protect? Somewhere between those answers lies a path that is braver than fear and wiser than denial, a path where the pain of losing no longer drowns out the joy of winning, and where you make your moves not only to avoid harm, but to create a life worth holding. Risk heuristics, the mind's shortcut to safety. Your brain would rather be fast and perfect when danger whispers. The paradox is simple and ancient. The shortcuts that once saved your life can quietly steal your clarity. Think of heuristics as the mind's rules of thumb. Simple, efficient strategies that help you decide quickly when information is messy and time is short. They are not bad, they are brilliant. They turn a world of endless data into a path you can walk. But like any shortcut, they leave things out. When the missing pieces are harmless, we move on without noticing. When the missing pieces involve risk, our shortcuts can bend reality until it fits the shape of our fear. You felt this. A vivid story clings to you more than statistics. A pattern you think you see pushes you to act. A strong feeling turns maybe into definitely. In those moments, the mind is simplifying the world to keep you safe. The cost is that safety becomes an impression rather than a calculation. The availability heuristic is one of the strongest of these shortcuts. It says, quietly, that the easier something is to remember, the more likely it must be. Vividness masquerades as probability. A dramatic plane crash on the news can make you grip the armrest on your next flight, even though the data hasn't changed. A story about a rare illness makes you scan your body for symptoms you'd never noticed before, as if the narrative itself were contagious. It isn't foolishness. It is memory doing its math with bright images and loud moments. Our attention loves what glows, and what glows in memory feels closer to our door. If 10 million calm landings slip by without a headline and one tragedy paints a sky, your mind carries the paint, not the silence. You might drive more to avoid flying and take on a greater risk without meaning to, guided by the ease with which one image returns. Sitting next to availability is the representativeness heuristic, a quieter rule that turns resemblance into truth. If something looks like a familiar pattern, we treat it as the pattern. The brain is a pattern machine. It has to be. But under risk, this gift can blur judgment. You hear that a thief was wearing a certain jacket in your neighborhood. Later, you see someone in the same jacket, and your vigilance spikes. You read 2 stories about a particular scam and start believing you can spot all scams by their surface details, ignoring how varied they are in practice. We do the same with trends. 3 bad days in the market, and we act as if we've seen the long-term future. 3 news reports of a rare crime, and we act as if the world has changed everywhere. Representativeness makes us mistake a fragment for the full picture. It tells us that small samples speak for large realities, that a part is enough to predict the whole. Under danger, this feels like wisdom. Under reflection, it's a guess wearing a mask. Then there's the effect heuristic, the one that speaks in the language of feeling. If something feels dangerous, we rate it as riskier. If it feels pleasant or familiar, we rate it as safer. Emotion is not the enemy here. It's a signal. But the signal can be amplified or muffled by context. A threat described with strong, sensory words, deadly, toxic, catastrophic, can feel riskier than a statistically larger but emotionally bland danger. A smiling spokesperson can make a risky product feel safe because warmth implies trust, and trust lowers the inner alarm. Music, colors, tone of voice, even the rhythm of a phrase, all of these shape how your nervous system weighs risk long before numbers arrive. In a calm mood, you might read a study and measure its claims. In an anxious mood, you might skim the headline and brace. The difference is not intelligence, it is state. Feelings set the frame for what the mind is willing to see. When these heuristics work together, better safe than sorry becomes a worldview rather than a momentary precaution. We overestimate rare, shocking dangers and underestimate common, quiet ones. We avoid the ocean after a shark movie, but eat carelessly in ways that harm us slowly. We buy protection we don't need and ignore protections that would truly help. We forward alarming messages because the cost of being wrong feels heavier in one direction than the other, as if every refusal to panic is a bet against our survival. This is how risk assessment turns irrational. The shortcuts that were meant to save effort start to stand in for truth. The mind grabs the easiest memory, the closest pattern, the strongest feeling, and calls it a plan. If we step inside the experience, it becomes clear why. Heuristics are cognitive generosity. They spare us from endless analysis. You can't live your life as a spreadsheet. You need quick guidance. The key is not to throw away the shortcuts, but to learn when they mislead. With availability, ask yourself whether the story that scares you is frequent or just memorable. Imagine putting that story into a jar with 1,000 ordinary, unreported moments. Does it still dominate? Or was it bright because it was rare? With representativeness, widen the sample. If 3 incidents seem to prove a rule, ask what you believe after 30 or 300. With effect, slow the body first. A longer exhale tells the nervous system to loosen its grip, and a looser grip lets numbers matter again. It's remarkable how often calm changes the conclusion without adding a single new fact. Consider how media environments shape these heuristics. News must be interesting. Interest is drawn to the unusual. The unusual is, by definition, not the base rate of life. So the very thing that keeps you watching can nudge availability toward exaggeration. Social feeds compress thousands of lives into a single stream, where catastrophe, outrage, and spectacle sit shoulder to shoulder with ordinary joy. The constant juxtaposition confuses your inner accountant. It feels like everything is happening all the time, to everyone everywhere. Under that illusion, your shortcuts scream. The world looks like a storm without a center. You brace, you scroll, you brace again, and the effect heuristic takes any spike in feeling as proof that risk has risen, even if you never left your chair. In relationships, these shortcuts quietly write scripts we rarely read. One sharp argument can make a marriage feel fragile because its vividness is available while 100 gentle days blur together. One betrayal can make a person representative of a whole category. Never again, we say, when the truth is that the pattern is smaller than the scar. One harsh message arriving while you are tired can feel like a crisis because your emotional state preloads danger into every word. The person you love hasn't changed. The way your heuristics are lit has. Better safe than sorry has its place. None of us want to be reckless. But better safe can also become smaller, lonelier, more suspicious. It can cost you opportunities, friendships, and growth. It can make your world feel like a corridor lined with alarms, each one insisting that the only wise move is to stay where you are. Safety, in that form, becomes a habit of avoidance. Real safety is different. It is the ability to meet reality with enough clarity to choose proportional action. It is not the absence of fear. It is the presence of perspective. So how do we practice? Gently. Start with language. When a risk feels huge, say, "This feels vivid. I don't yet know if it's likely." When a pattern seems obvious, say, "This resembles the thing I fear. I need a bigger sample." When emotion is hot, say, "My feeling is strong. Let me cool it before I decide." These sentences don't erase the moment. They create space inside it. In that space, imagine two dials on the wall of your mind. One is vividness, one is frequency. Turn vividness down and frequency up. Ask for base rates, for context, for comparison. Then, if action is still needed, act. Your choices will be safer because they rest on more than a single shining memory or a single heavy feeling. Tonight, notice one place where a shortcut is steering you. It might be a headline that makes you tense, a choice you're avoiding, a story you keep telling yourself about how the world works. Ask whether availability, representativeness, or effect is at the wheel. Breathe. Widen the lens. Invite a calmer version of you to sit beside the worried one. The goal is not to be fearless. It is to be fair. To your own life. To the truth in front of you. To the future you want to build. When the mind shortcuts are seen and guided, they become what they were meant to be. Quick helpers on a long road, not the road itself. And in that guidance, you reclaim a kind of safety that is deeper than avoidance, the safety that comes from seeing clearly and choosing wisely, even when the world is noisy and the heart is loud. The evolution of fear-based communication. We learn the world through warnings. Before we learn language, we learn the look on a face that says danger, the grip on a wrist that says stop, the tone in a voice that says don't. The paradox is that fear is both a teacher and a leash. It kept our ancestors alive, and it keeps our attention obedient. If you listen closely, you can hear the first messages of fear the human animal ever sent. They were not speeches or scriptures. They were the quick calls across grasslands, the sudden silence that spreads through a group when a shadow passes overhead, the shared instinct to freeze when the world goes quiet. Long before there were alphabets, there were signals, crisp, simple, and urgent. Hands raised, bodies clustered, eyes fixed on the same point. The vocabulary was heart rate, posture, breath. The syntax was survival. Those signals worked so reliably that they became the template for all the fear-based communication that followed. Compress the world into a risk, broadcast it fast, move the group as one. As our bands grew into villages and villages into cities, fear learned to wear words. Myths warned of floods sent by offended gods, forests haunted by spirits who punished trespass, night creatures that stole children if doors were left open. These were not merely stories to entertain at fireside. They were social codes wrapped in terror. Do this or else. Stay near the circle of light or else. Pay respect to the temple, the elders, the law, or else. Religion, at its best, offered moral structure and meaning. At its worst, it amplified fear to enforce obedience. The human drive to explain the unknown, why storms rage, why droughts last, why plagues spread, found an efficient tool in fear. If you want the group to behave, you do not always persuade. You warn. And the warning works not because it is true in every detail, but because the body obeys the possibility of loss before the mind completes its investigation. Early legal codes learned the same lesson. Carve the punishments in stone, display them in the square, and turn invisible rules into public threats. The point was not only justice, it was deterrence through imagination. When the penalty is vivid, the crime grows heavier in the mind. A community that cannot afford disorder exports a portion of its fear into spectacle. Stocks, gallows, tribunals, so that every passerby becomes a witness and a student. The logic is primitive and effective. Tie the idea of wrongdoing to a sharp, memorable pain, and the social fabric holds. Even today, we instinctively rehearse the worst-case scenario when we think about breaking a rule. The rehearsal itself is a message we absorbed long before we could name it. Then came the age when fear became organized as mass persuasion. When empires expanded and literacy spread, those who understood the mind's shortcuts built machines to steer them. Wartime turned the dial to maximum. Posters did not ask the public to consider, they told them to brace. The enemy was drawn with exaggerated features and predatory silhouettes. The stakes were painted as existential. The choice presented to citizens was not between costs and benefits, but between survival and annihilation. Newspapers, radio, cinema, all pulsed with the same rhythm. If you do not act, you will lose. your country, your children, your future. It is easy to accuse past propagandists of manipulation, and often they were guilty. But the deeper truth is this: fear mobilizes faster than reason because fear compresses time. In an emergency, speed wins. So even noble causes adopt the voice of threat to assemble the public. And in that voice, the nervous system hears its oldest music. As industry matured and markets became crowded, marketing borrowed the drum. The product could be framed as a ticket to more pleasure, but converted better as a shield against loss. Insurance did not just promise compensation. It promised to protect your family from a cruel world. Food safety campaigns didn't just advertise cleanliness. They warned of invisible dangers crawling on your countertop. Security systems sold sleep by showing intruders. Even beauty products slipped into the logic of fear. Don't age, don't smell, don't be left behind. The most effective campaigns learn to link an everyday object to a primal dread and then offer relief in a bottle, a plan, a monthly fee. Selling safety is easier than selling satisfaction, because safety speaks to the watchman inside you who guards the door day and night. Modern media perfected the feedback loop. A headline is a flare. A feed is a field of flares. The algorithms favor engagement, and engagement is a creature with a quick pulse that leaps at shock. Fearful content stays longer on the screen. So is shown more. So it stays even longer, until our sense of proportion thins. A single incident becomes a pattern. An anomaly masquerades as a trend. We wake to a world that looks dangerous in every direction because our window is edited for alarm. The continuity here is striking. From ancient shouts to digital notifications, the structure is identical. Alert, simplify, command. The platforms changed, the amygdala did not. Yet it would be unfair to say fear-based communication only manipulates. It also saves. Public health campaigns that warn of contagion, weather alerts that warn of storms, product recalls that prevent harm. These are fear talking for our benefit. The difference is not in the presence of fear, but in its aim and proportion. When the goal is collective protection and the message matches the real magnitude of risk, fear is a responsible messenger. When the goal is profit, power, or clicks, fear swells beyond the facts and leaves us smaller than we were. The same signal can be clarifying or corrosive depending on the honesty of its source and the discipline of its tone. If we travel through time with that lens, we see the same choreography repeated. A leader stands before a crowd and sketches a danger large enough to unite strangers. A lawgiver writes punishments in words sharp enough to stop wanderers. A merchant whispers the price of not buying. A broadcaster breaks into your day with red banners and urgent sounds. The content shifts, demons to spies to hackers to invisible particles, but the grammar hardly changes. Frame the story at the edge of loss. Make the threat vivid and close. Offer a clear action that restores control. Promise that obedience returns safety and noncompliance invites pain. Humans have always responded to this, not because we are weak, but because we are wired to guard the perimeter first and ask philosophical questions second. So what are we to do in a world where fear speaks fluent languages and can be piped into our pockets at any hour? We cannot mute the messenger forever. We can, however, change our posture while we listen. First, we can ask of any fear-based message, is this warning trying to protect me or to possess me? Protection returns power to the listener. Possession keeps the power with the speaker. Protection invites verification. Possession discourages questions. Protection feels like care. Possession feels like control. Second, we can measure scale. How big is the base rate behind this vivid example? How far is the danger from my actual life? How much of my day deserves to be organized around it? And third, we can remember that attention is a finite currency. Every unit spent on hypothetical catastrophes is a unit not invested in the quieter work of building resilience, relationships, skills, and communities. The very things that make us safer in the long run. There's one more, softer truth worth holding. Many of the people who use fear to reach you believe they are helping. Parents warn to keep their children safe. Faith leaders warn to keep their flocks together. Officials warn to avoid chaos. Editors warn to keep the audience informed. Even advertisers, in their way, are offering a balm for a worry you already carry. The problem is not that fear speaks. It is that we forget to translate it. We take the signal as a command rather than a cue. We forget to bring our slower mind to the microphone. We forget that between alarm and action there's room for wisdom. So tonight, as you hear the old voice in new clothes, whether it comes from a story on your phone, a rule at work, a speech on a stage, or a whisper in your own head, pause and ask, what is being protected, and at what cost? Who benefits from my fear, and who benefits from my clarity? If the message leads you to constructive steps, and then lets you go, it is likely a good guide. If it keeps you hooked, angry, and scanning the horizon for more enemies, it may be using your biology against you. The continuity of fear as a tool is not destiny. It is an invitation to evolve our listening. We can honor the ancient purpose of alarm while refusing to live in a permanent siren. We can let warnings help us prepare without letting them define who we are. In that small, human choice between reacting and responding, there's a freedom our ancestors could only glimpse between shadows, the freedom to be safe and still see clearly, to guard what matters without surrendering your mind. Media, politics, and the economy of fear. When attention becomes a currency, fear becomes a mint. The most profitable story is rarely the truest. It's the one that keeps your pulse high and your finger from looking away. Let's start with the room you're in right now. A screen glowing, a feed in motion, your mind half here and half pulled by whatever might explode next. This is the attention economy, and it runs on emotional engagement the way engines run on fuel. Calm is expensive and slow. Fear is cheap and fast. If you own a platform or a podium, and your survival depends on people staying with you, you will inevitably learn to speak the language that never fails. Danger, urgency, threat. It is not a conspiracy so much as a gravity. The systems that win are the systems that keep us watching, and since fear keeps us watching, the systems become fluent in fear. Politics learned this before platforms did. The ancient trick is still the modern playbook. Define an enemy, declare a crisis, and promise protection. The crowd tightens. Strangers become a tribe under pressure. Loyalty grows when people feel surrounded. If you can convince them that only you know the shape of the danger, then only you can be trusted with the map. The slogans change, the colors change, the century changes, but the choreography barely moves. They threaten what is yours. I and I alone can defend you. In that framing, compromise looks like betrayal and nuance looks like weakness. We forget that most problems are solved with quiet cooperation away from cameras. The camera prefers a cliff. Politics supplies one on demand. Media learn to mirror and magnify this rhythm. The old line, if it bleeds, it leads, is not a joke, it's a business model. What shocks is displayed first, loudest, and longest, because the queue of ads behind it need your stare. A story that is accurate but slow will not outcompete a story that is vivid and fearful. Entire editorial calendars tilt toward the unusual, because unusual keeps attention, even if unusual is not what most lives are built from. The result is a window that distorts the street. You look out and see emergency after emergency. A world shredded by constant crisis, not because nothing good is happening, but because routine goodness has a low return on investment. You could say the news is a museum of exceptions, where the plaques are written in red. Then came the platforms that automated the choice. Algorithms do not have ideologies. They have objectives. They learn what you can't resist and hand you more of it. If a headline with a fearful tone gets you to stop, the machine remembers. If a post that paints enemies in stark colors keeps you engaged, the machine evolves. Over time, your feed bends toward content that raises your arousal and narrows your attention, because that combination maximizes time on site. And since fear sharpens arousal while simplifying thought, fear-driven content rises. This is not the intention of a villain. It is the emergent behavior of a system optimized for engagement, meeting, and nervous system optimized for survival. You become a loop. What scares you is what you see, and what you see confirms that you are right to be scared. There is a cost for living in this weather. Psychological fatigue sets in. First is agitation, then as exhaustion, then as numbness. When your body is keyed up all day by alarms, it learns to save energy by feeling less. The technical word is desensitization. The felt experience is a dulling of the inner instrument. You scroll past real tragedies because you've run out of tears. You mute people you love because their anxieties flood your own. You stop absorbing nuance because your cognitive budget is spent on bracing. Slowly, your world divides into threats and refuges, and anything that asks for attention without promising immediate safety feels like a luxury you cannot afford. Books wait unread. Conversations shrink to slogans. Sleep becomes shallow. Trust thins. The economy of fear also reshapes communities. Groups bond through shared danger, so the easiest way to build an audience is to warn them about the same enemy. But the stronger the bond is to the threat, the weaker it is to each other when the threat quiets. Movements fueled by constant alarm must keep the alarm ringing to keep the group intact, which means the rhetoric must escalate or find new targets. This is why some online spaces feel like living in a firehouse where the siren never stops. The identity of the group becomes bound to being under siege. People who ask for moderation look like traitors. People who examine facts look like apologists. Meanwhile, the quieter work of building something, policies, relationships, habits, feels flat compared to the adrenaline of fighting phantoms. And yet we need warnings. We need investigative journalism that uncovers harm. We need leaders who can rally us when a real crisis comes. We even need platforms that surface urgent information quickly when a storm approaches or recall is issued. The problem is not fear itself, it's dosage and design. When every day is a catastrophe, catastrophes stop moving us. When every person who disagrees is an enemy, actual enemies become harder to recognize. When an algorithm mistakes our startle for our preference, it builds us a house made of sirens. The mind cannot live there without losing the ability to sense the ordinary, which is where most of your life happens. Making breakfast, learning a skill, loving someone patiently, fixing a small thing well. So how do we walk out of this without closing our eyes to what matters? Begin by honoring your attention as a finite resource. Treat it like money and time. Ask who earns it, who spends it for me, who counterfeits it with alarms. Curate your inputs the way you curate your diet. A single high-fear source can tilt your whole day. A balanced set can restore proportion. Choose long form over endless fragments when you can, because depth stretches the mind back to its full size. When you feel that quick rush to share an alarming bit of content, pause. Ask whether you are spreading information or outsourcing your anxiety. Often, the most radical act in a fear-driven economy is to verify quietly and then not repost. In politics, seek voices that can tell hard truths without rehearsing apocalypse. These voices exist, but they are harder to hear because they do not ride the algorithmic escalator. They ask you to imagine building, not just surviving. They admit trade-offs. They speak to your agency without flattering your anger. Support them with the small, stubborn choices that move culture. Click, subscribe, donate, vote, show up in person. The more we feed the parts of the system that reward proportion, the less food we give to those that reward panic. It will never be perfect. It can be better. As for media, remember that what looks like the whole world is a set of editorial and computational choices. You are allowed to step away without becoming uninformed. You are allowed to read a weekly digest instead of a minute-by-minute drip. You are allowed to turn off push alerts and still be a good citizen. You are allowed to balance what is urgent with what is important, which often includes things that will never trend. Your health, your craft, your relationships, your quiet. Calm is not withdrawal, it is calibration. And for yourself, notice the early signs of fatigue before they harden into cynicism. If you catch yourself unable to feel, let there be a signal to rest, not a reason to double down on stronger stimuli. Walk without headphones. Cook something simple. Write a letter by hand. Sit across from someone and trade stories that will never be clipped into outrage. These are not escapes from reality. They are repairs to your instrument so that when reality truly needs you, you can respond with clarity rather than reflex. This chapter is not an argument for comfort over truth. It is a reminder that your nervous system is not a battlefield to be rented by the highest bidder. Fear will always have a loud voice in public life, because it works. Your power is not to silence it, but to place it in context. Ask of every message, does this sharpen my understanding or only spike my alarm? Ask of every leader, do they trust me with complexity, or do they keep me loyal with dread? Ask of every platform, is it helping me make sense, or just helping me stay? The questions themselves begin to reclaim the territory inside you that no market should own. As you close your screen tonight, take a breath and look at your life as it is. Rooms familiar to your hands, people who carry your days with you, problems that are real and solvable with time and care. The world is not less dangerous than the headlines say, but it is also not less beautiful than your body forgets when it is tired. Somewhere between alarm and apathy is a steady place where you stay informed without being devoured, where you can hear warnings without becoming one. Stand there. From that ground, you can meet politics without being played, media without being molded, and the economy of fear without giving it your soul. Fear and persuasion, the architecture of threat messaging. Fear speaks in a clean geometry, a looming shape, a narrow doorway, and a single path that promises safety. The paradox is that the message that frightens you most can also be the one that gives you the clearest instructions for relief. If you could slow fear-based persuasion down and watch it frame by frame, you'd see it has a body. First, a picture of danger sharp enough to cut through distraction. Then, a bridge that says there is a way across. Finally, a step-by-step cue that tells you exactly where to place your feet. This is the anatomy of a fear appeal. It doesn't ask you to ponder. It asks you to move. It makes the threat feel real and close, then pairs it with a specific action that feels doable now. When it works, you experience a quick sequence inside. Shock, focus, relief. The shock grabs you. The focus locks you in. The relief is offered in the form of a behavior, a policy, a product, a vote. The message becomes not just information, but a route for your nervous system. Researchers have a name for this choreography, the extended parallel process model. It sounds technical, but its intuition is human. The model says that when a message raises your perception of threat by showing severity and making you feel personally vulnerable, you will move in one of two directions, depending on what comes next. If the message quickly raises your sense of efficacy, your belief that you can do something that actually works, you lean into danger control. You do the thing. You get vaccinated. You wear the seatbelt. You update the password. You call your representative. You buy the alarm. If, on the other hand, the message raises fear without raising efficacy, you tilt into fear control. You dismiss, deny, avoid, joke, argue, scroll, shut the tab, shoot the messenger. The mind would rather shrink the feeling than sit in helplessness. So the balance is everything. Enough threat to wake you up. Enough efficacy to keep you from running away from the feeling. Think about the last public health campaign that truly moved behavior. The effective ones do not float in abstraction. They do not say, illness is bad in general. They show you a consequence vivid enough to feel, then a simple path you can follow. The hospital bed is not a metaphor. The mask is specific. The shot is available at the corner pharmacy at 10 a.m. The message names the danger and puts your hand on a doorknob you can turn. Without that doorknob, fear becomes a room with no exits, and you will look for a window to climb out of, even if the window is denial. This is why believable threats convert better than abstract ones. The brain does not act on theory. It acts on pictures and handles. A real handle is an invitation to mastery. Cybersecurity ads do this all the time. They don't lecture you on the philosophy of privacy. They show a stranger sliding into your accounts, the cursor moving where it shouldn't, the small theft that becomes a larger one. Then they offer a clear move. Turn on two-factor authentication. Install this update. Press this button. The fear is immediate and emotional, but the action is concrete and near. Severity plus vulnerability, followed by self-efficacy plus response efficacy. You believe you can do the step, and you believe the step works. That pairing is what transforms fear from paralysis into motion. Political messaging understands the formula, too, though often with more heat than care. A strong fear appeal draws the enemy close to your door, defines the stakes as existential, and puts a candidate or policy in the role of the bridge. The ad does not aim for nuance. It aims for a picture that your nervous system will not ignore. A factory gate closing, a border in chaos, a violent clip on repeat. Then a promise of control. Vote this way, donate now, join us. When the threat is believable because you can imagine it happening to you and the action feels like a lever you can actually pull, conversion rises. When the threat is bloated beyond your experience or the action feels symbolic and hollow, you retreat into fear, control, or cynicism. You shake your head. You shut your eyes. You tell yourself it's all theater, because the body refuses to sit in fear without agency for long. There's a delicate threshold here that good communicators learn to sense. Too little threat and people yawn. Too much threat and people freeze or attack the message. Too little efficacy and people numb out. Too much efficacy without honest threat and people dismiss the call as marketing gloss. The sweet spot feels almost musical. A strong bass line of danger, a steady melody of you can, and a clear rhythm of here's how. When you hear that song, your attention leans forward without tipping into dread. You feel the weight of risk, but you also feel your own hands on the wheel. Believability lives in details. An abstract warning like society is collapsing might stir anxiety, but it does not point to a handle you can grip. Show the specific school where a program is closing, the data showing the trend in your zip code, the timeline for when decisions happen, and suddenly the threat moves from fog to shape. You are more likely to act when your brain can simulate the path from hearing to doing. This is why proximity matters. We respond more to local floods than to distant climate graphs, more to a neighbor's break-in than to national crime statistics, more to a friend's identity theft than to a white paper. The story tightens the loop. Your mind says, people like me, places like mine, times like now, and the body prepares to move. But ethical fear appeals carry another responsibility. They must scale emotion to evidence. It is easy to push severity until reason snaps. You can make any risk look apocalyptic with the right music and edits. You can make any outlier look like a trend by repeating it. The short-term conversion might rise, but the long-term trust will fall. People remember when they were frightened into action for a threat that never arrived. They remember when they were told a single step would solve a complex problem and woke up to disappointment. The next time, the same message will trigger fatigue rather than focus. In a world saturated with alarms, the most persuasive voice may be the one that refuses to scream. This is where the gentler craft of persuasion becomes a kind of therapy for attention. Speak to the part of the listener that wants to care, not just the part that can be startled. Frame the threat in a way that honors intelligence. Offer actions that are proportionate and realistic. Admit uncertainty where it exists and name what is known without drama. You are not just trying to move a behavior. You are trying to preserve a relationship with the mind on the other side of the screen. When people feel respected, they can tolerate more discomfort and stay with the message long enough to change. The line between motivating and paralyzing is also a line between you and we. Fear that isolates you. You alone are at risk and responsible. Can crush efficacy. Fear that connects you. We face this together, and here is what we can each do. Expands it. The most effective public campaigns often braid individual steps with collective ones, giving you a small win that matters personally and a larger sense that your small win is part of a bigger repair. In that frame, you are not just preventing your own loss. You are participating in a shared safeguard. That matters because isolation is a solvent. It weakens belief in your own capacity. And without that belief, fear curdles. Think of a well-made campaign against texting and driving. The ineffective version might show a pileup and shout, "Don't do it." The effective version tells you a small, doable behavior. Put your phone in the glove box before you start the car, and shows the difference it makes. It lets you rehearse the action in your mind. It may even invite you to text someone now, before you drive, promising you won't reply until you arrive. The threat is believable because you've seen the near miss in your own life. The efficacy is high because the action is simple and immediate. Your self-image aligns with the choice. You are not just avoiding a ticket. You are being the protector of your own life and the lives around you. As you listen to fear-based messages in your day, try a small experiment. Separate the parts. Name the threat. Do I understand what is at stake and why it matters to me? Name the efficacy. Do I believe the suggested action will work, and can I do it? If either answer is weak, notice your body tilt toward avoidance, anger, or apathy. You are not stubborn. You are protecting yourself from helplessness. If both answers are strong, notice how naturally your body wants to move. There is grace in being guided well. Before you close your eyes tonight, ask a quiet question about the messages you let into your life. Which ones use fear to wake me up and then put strength back in my hands? And which ones use fear to keep me watching, buying, or obeying without end? The difference is the difference between being treated as a citizen and being treated as a captive. You cannot stop fear from knocking, and sometimes you shouldn't. But you can choose which architects you trust to build the bridge out of it. Choose the ones who balance danger with dignity, urgency with honesty, and alarm with a real way forward. In that choice, you become harder to manipulate and easier to move for the right reasons. A person who can feel the shape of the threat and still see the path that leads beyond it. The illusion of control. How fear feeds decision bias. Fear often dresses itself as wisdom. It feels like readiness, like tightening the straps before the storm arrives. And that is the paradox at the heart of this chapter. The same feeling that makes you careful can quietly convince you that control is in your hands when it isn't. Think about the private comfort of preparation. You line up your keys, charge the phone, check the locks, refresh the tracking number, read one more review, pack an extra charger, and a backup plan for the backup plan. The ritual soothes the nervous system. Each small action is a promise to your future self. I will not be surprised. In moments like these, fear does not feel like panic. It feels like competence. It borrows the posture of responsibility. And in many ways, preparation is responsible. A life without any foresight is chaos. But there's a thin seam between readiness and the illusion of control, and fear loves to slip through it. It whispers that if you anticipate enough, you can prevent pain entirely, as if complexity were a machine that obeys your lists. The illusion of control is not arrogance so much as hope wearing armor. When we feel threatened, the mind searches for handles. We overestimate the influence of our choices on outcomes that depend on luck, other people, or larger systems. We prefer buttons that light up even when they don't do much, because the glow is a story we can hold. You see it in the way we mash the crosswalk switch, in the way we refresh the stock app 10 times an hour, in the way we believe that perfect wording will guarantee the response we want from someone we love. Overconfidence grows in the soil of anxiety. It blooms as certainty about our ability to avoid the thing we fear. The more afraid we are, the more magical our thinking can become, because the mind would rather believe in levers than admit to currents. Here lies another paradox. Fear both narrows and expands attention. It narrows by putting a spotlight on the suspected threat, making the edges of the world go dim. You see the snake, not the garden. You read the comet, not the lifetime of relationship around it. You focus on a possible loss with such intensity that you forget the other paths, the other values, the other times you survived. But fear also expands attention in a different way. It multiplies contingencies. Suddenly every branch of the future splinters into what-ifs. You plan for 10 outcomes at once and carry the weight of all of them in your body. The mind is simultaneously tunnel-visioned and overwhelmed. You miss the whole picture while trying to see every possible picture. It is exhausting to live this way, and yet it feels like vigilance. It feels like love. When the illusion of control meets real decisions, we often become defensive. Defensive decision-making is the art of choosing the option that protects you from future blame rather than the one that might create the best outcome. Doctors order extra tests they don't think are necessary because you can't be too careful. Managers require consensus for a choice that needs speed, just to share the risk. Employees copy everyone on an email so no one can say they were left out. Parents choose the most padded path for a child, even when the child needs friction to grow. None of these moves are evil. They are understandable in a world where criticism is cheap and hindsight is harsh. But over time, defensive decisions calcify into a style of life. Minimize exposure, commute between safe harbors, avoid boldness because boldness might fail in public. Overcaution looks virtuous on the surface. It uses words like responsible, prudent, and sensible. Underneath, it can be a quiet surrender to fear's demand for guarantees. You take the job that drains you because it seems safer than the craft that would stretch you. You say no to the relationship that might change you because you cannot script its next 5 years. You stay in the town where your dreams feel impossible because leaving would be a vote for your agency and a vote against your certainty. Safety matters, and recklessness has its own costs. But the safety bias, our tilt toward options that feel safe regardless of their true value, can lead us to build cages and call them shelters. We confuse predictability with protection. We forget that resilience grows from contact with the world, not permanent insulation from it. Businesses and leaders understand this bias and often exploit it, sometimes gently, sometimes ruthlessly. A company sells an extended warranty for a device that already has a solid guarantee, not because the math is fair to you, but because the feeling of insurance quiets your amygdala at the counter. A platform locks features behind subscriptions labeled Protection, Shield, or Guardian, embedding safety into the product's identity so that canceling feels like exposing your family. A leader frames every change as a threat to your way of life and every policy as a barrier against chaos, not because the policy is wise, but because fear keeps your loyalty warm. The message is consistent. Buy control, vote control, subscribe to control. The truth is quieter. Complexity can be navigated, not mastered. Risk can be reduced, not erased. Control can be shared, not owned. The architecture of exploitation is simple. First, highlight uncertainty and raise your perceived vulnerability. Second, offer a product, policy, or plan that promises to neutralize the danger. Third, imply that not choosing it is irresponsible. This taps the comfort of preparation, inflates the illusion of control, and punishes dissent with a subtle shame. If you were truly caring, truly smart, you would pick the safer option. Notice how little reference is made to opportunity costs, trade-offs, or long-term resilience. Safety bias thrives when only one dimension is measured, avoidance of near-term pain, while other dimensions vanish from the model. So how do we stay awake inside this fog without becoming reckless? We can begin by changing the language we use with ourselves. Instead of asking, "What choice makes me safest right now?" try, "What choice makes me stronger 6 months from now?" Safety that weakens you over time isn't safety. It's sedation. We can also separate preparation from prediction. Prepare for what you can influence, skills, savings, relationships, habits, and release the fantasy that you can predict what you can't. Invest in your capacity rather than rehearsing catastrophes. The former expands options, the latter tightens them. It also helps to renegotiate our relationship with discomfort. Fear often masquerades as foresight when it is really avoidance of feeling, awkwardness, uncertainty, exposure. If you can bear those feelings without interpreting them as danger, your map changes. You realize a difficult conversation is not a cliff, but a bridge. You realize a calculated risk is not betrayal of prudence, but an expression of commitment to growth. You realize that some outcomes will be painful because life is not a contract with comfort, and control is not the measure of worth. Wisdom is the capacity to respond well when control is limited, not the power to eliminate every surprise. Consider how this plays out in the small theater of your day. You may notice how often you seek microcontrols, refreshing a delivery page, checking a bank balance repeatedly, rearranging a plan 3 times before lunch. Gently limit the rituals that don't actually change outcomes. Replace them with actions that do. Call the person you're avoiding. Take the first step on the project you've delayed. Write the draft you might hate and revise it tomorrow. The moment your energy shifts from monitoring to making, the illusion fades and agency returns. Control is not a feeling. It is a series of useful moves. For leaders, the ethical path is to respect the safety bias without playing it like an instrument. Speak plainly about risks. Pair threats with capabilities instead of guarantees. Teach teams to tolerate uncertainty through small experiments and clear after-action learning. Reward thoughtful bets, not just tidy outcomes. Create cultures where admitting "I don't know" is a sign of honesty, not weakness. You will still lose some people to louder voices that promise certainty. You will keep the ones who want to grow. And for all of us, there is a softer practice beneath the strategy. It is learning to sit with the part of you that is frightened and wants to control the world because it loves your life. Thank it for its service. Ask it to walk with you rather than drive. Then step into the day with a simple, sturdy posture. Prepared where it matters, open where it counts, willing to be surprised, willing to repair, willing to try. The worst that can happen is not always the thing that happens. The best that can happen is often on the other side of a gate labeled "No Guarantees." As you close this chapter, consider a gentle question. Where, right now, are you mistaking the feeling of control for the fact of it? And if you loosen your grip by 1 inch, not recklessly, but consciously, what thoughtful risk would you take that builds the kind of safety you can't buy? Skill, trust, presence, courage. Fear will still knock. Let it remind you to pack the essentials. But do not let it sell you a map that only leads back to your doorway. The world is not mastered by those who never step outside. It is shaped by those who step out wisely, accept what they cannot command, and make something good anyway. Beyond fear, reclaiming rational attention. The mind you want is already inside you. It has simply been crowded by alarms. The paradox is this: fear is loud, wisdom is quiet, and yet it is the quiet voice that knows where to go. Begin here gently. Notice your attention as if it were a bird perched on your hand, sensitive, skittish, always leaning toward movement. Everything in our environment tempts it to startle. Headlines, warnings, rumors, the sharp clang of someone else's outrage. If you don't hold that bird with care, it will belong to whoever claps the loudest. Reclaiming rational attention is not about becoming stone. It is about building a steadiness that can feel without being swept away. You don't need a new brain. You need a new stance toward the signals that keep borrowing it. The first skill is recognition. Fear-based manipulation has a scent, and once you learn it, you can smell it in the first sentence. It speaks in absolutes, compresses time, and offers a single narrow exit. It turns complexity into a cliff and sells you a rope. It wants you urgent, because urgency suffocates curiosity. So when a message arrives hot, do not shame yourself for reacting. That is biology doing its job. Simply name the state. I'm being rushed. That small label slides a thin sheet of clarity between the trigger and your choice. In that inch of space, ask 3 quiet questions. Is the threat specific? Is the evidence proportionate? And is the recommended action actually within my power? Fear thrives when those answers are vague. It weakens when they become clear. Cognitive reframing is the art of changing the light without changing the object. You cannot always alter what the world brings you, but you can stand at a different place to see it. Replace "this is catastrophic" with "this is uncomfortable and solvable." Exchange "everything is broken" for "some things are broken." Here is one I can repair. When a headline screams, reframe it as a hypothesis rather than a verdict. This could be true. What would I need to know to confirm it? Reframing is not denial. It is a disciplined refusal to let the most dramatic angle become the only angle. The brain follows the frame. Give it one that preserves agency and proportion. Mindfulness in media consumption begins long before you open an app. Curate the garden that grows the fruit you will eat later. Choose longer pieces that explain over shorter pieces that inflame. Replace constant alerts with scheduled check-ins. Read full studies or trustworthy summaries instead of screenshots of screenshots. When you do consume, practice single-task attention. One article, end to end, no hopping. Notice how your body feels during and after. If your chest tightens and your patience thins, the content may be using your nervous system as a battery. Close the tab. Walk. Breathe with your entire back. Return to the subject with a calmer instrument. Calm is not a withdrawal from responsibility. It is the condition for responsible thought. To live beyond fear, you must learn to befriend uncertainty. Most manipulation leans on our allergy to ambiguity. It presents blurry futures as emergencies and sells relief from not knowing as certainty. The antidote is to raise your tolerance for the gray. Practice with small things. Let a message sit unanswered for an hour without inventing a story. Hold two plausible explanations at once and allow time to test them. Admit, "I don't know yet," to yourself and to others without flinching. When ambiguity no longer feels like danger, you stop paying anyone who promises to remove it for a fee. You also stop inventing conspiracies to patch the holes of the unknown. Reality can be incomplete and still be safe enough to act within. Education against emotional hijacking is less a lecture and more a ritual. Teach yourself, and the people around you, to spot the signatures of manipulation. The sacred urgency that forbids pause, the use of shame as proof, the flood of anecdotes in place of base rates, the framing that turns neighbors into existential threats. Practice emotion first, action second. If a post spikes your emotion, sit with the feeling as an object. Name it, locate it in the body. Let it crest and recede before you share, buy, or reply. In groups, create norms that reward verification, credit correction, and protect a voice that says, "Let's check." These are not merely etiquette, they are immunizations. A community becomes resilient when it can feel deeply and still demand evidence. If you want a practical foothold, build small habits that shift your attention from threat to possibility without lying about risk. Start mornings with a question that makes you a maker, not a monitor. What small thing will I improve today? Track progress, not just exposures. Keep a visible list of constructive actions that follow any alarming topic you care about. Donation routes, contact points, skill trainings, local meetings, so the energy fear generates has somewhere honest to go. Possibility is not a mood that appears by accident. It is a posture you feed by giving attention to the world's workable edges. When you spend time there, fear shrinks to its proper size. An advisor, not a king. There is also a deeper move, shifting identity from the startled to the steady. Every day offers roles: reactor, repeater, amplifier, witness, builder. Fear loves you as an amplifier. Rational attention asks you to become a witness and a builder. A witness does not deny pain. They place it in context. A builder turns concern into craft. In practice, that might mean learning how local systems work, so your advocacy is precise. It might mean improving one piece of your professional world, so fewer emergencies arise. It might mean tending a relationship so the next argument becomes a conversation. None of this trends. All of it quietly restores sovereignty over your attention. Notice, too, how fear often claims to be your only protector. It tells you that if you stop scanning, you will be careless. If you stop bracing, you will be naive. The wiser truth is that a nervous system stuck in alarm loses the very faculties it needs to stay safe: memory, nuance, patience, foresight. You become jumpy and brittle. Rational attention is not soft. It is a stronger shield because it lets you see more of the board. It keeps your field of view wide enough to spot exits and allies, to recognize patterns without hallucinating enemies, to time your moves rather than flinching at every sound. When manipulation tries to draft you, answer with proportion. If a claim is vast, ask for vast evidence. If a solution is total, look for what it ignores. If a messenger forbids questions, step back. Proportion does not drain urgency where urgency is earned. It protects urgency from being squandered on theater. You have a right to keep your adrenaline for real fires. You have a responsibility to keep your mind for real thinking. Teach this to yourself in the language of the body. Make a simple practice the hinge of your day. 1 minute of slow breathing before opening news. A brief scan of physical signals before replying when you are angry. A stretch or a walk after every extended session online. The body is not a secondary concern. It is the stage on which attention performs. A tense body hears threat in every sentence. A regulated body can afford generosity. Reclaiming rational attention is not a private luxury. It is a public gift. Calm thinkers are better neighbors. They correct less and contribute more. They can disagree without exile. They remember that most people are trying, that most systems are fixable, that most days are not disasters. They are not blind to danger. They simply refuse to make danger their only lens. From them, trust becomes possible again. Not the blind trust that invites abuse, but the earned trust that makes cooperation efficient. A society built on that kind of attention does not need fear to move. It moves because it sees. As you close this chapter, try one gentle experiment tonight. Before you sleep, review the day and circle a single moment when fear tried to hire your mind. Maybe it was a headline, a comment, a thought at 3 a.m. Now, without judgment, rewrite that moment as a script you would give to a friend you love. Here's the claim. Here's what we know. Here's what we don't. Here is one proportionate step. Feel the difference in your shoulders. That is rational attention returning to its throne. The alarms will still ring tomorrow. Some will matter. Most will not. Your work is not to silence the world, but to tune your instrument so you can tell which sounds call for music and which call for rest. Between fear and possibility, there is a door that only opens from the inside. You open it each time you choose clarity over spectacle, presence over panic, and the next right step over the fantasy of control. Walk through and take your attention with you. It is the most precious thing you own, and the world is better when you spend it wisely. The ethics of fear, using threats responsibly. Fear can break a mind or save a life. The difference is not the danger itself, but the hands that carry it and the purpose behind the message. If we're honest, none of us is free from using fear. Parents warn to keep children safe. Teachers warn to prepare students for consequences. Doctors warn to protect patients from avoidable harm. Pilots, lifeguards, engineers, and public officials all communicate risks so people can act in time. At its best, fear is a form of care. It narrows attention just enough to pass through a tight doorway. It points at the cliff before the step. But fear has another face. It can be sharpened into a blade that cuts trust, sells products that don't help, wins elections that divide, and pins people to the wall with panic. The ethics of fear is the quiet discipline of choosing the first face over the second, especially when the second would be easier and louder. When is fear necessary? When a real hazard threatens people who cannot see it clearly or quickly. Warnings, safety education, and risk awareness exist for this reason. The ethical communicator measures the dose. Too little fear and the message fades. Too much and the listener freezes or shuts down. The goal is not to frighten but to inform with urgency. A storm siren that blares once at the right moment is mercy. A siren that never stops becomes cruelty. The test is simple. Does the message reduce harm without creating new harm in the mind? If the answer is yes, fear has done its rightful work, like a hand on the shoulder that says, "Look," and then lets you choose. Ethical communication in marketing and governance follows the same compass. In marketing, it means refusing to tie products to invented crises or to inflate small risks into existential ones. It means proving claims, naming limits, and avoiding the trick where a brand positions itself as the only barrier between a customer and catastrophe. A home alarm company can show real break-in patterns without staging terror. A health app can speak to prevention without promising immortality. A financial service can warn about scams without turning every transaction into doom. The line is honesty about scale, probability, and alternatives. Fear that tells the truth with proportion respects the person who hears it. In governance, ethics becomes even more serious because the message can move millions. Leaders carry the weight of choosing when to sound the alarm and when to calm the room. Ethical leaders do both. They name threats plainly and pair them with transparent plans, timelines, and trade-offs. They invite scrutiny rather than hiding behind the fog of emergency. They do not treat citizens as pawns who need to be scared into compliance. They treat them as partners who deserve the facts. The words chosen matter. A phrase that paints neighbors as enemies for political gain may raise turnout, but it lowers the floor of our common life. The first duty of a fear-based message in public life is not to win, but to preserve trust. Without trust, no future warning will work when it must. So, where is the line between persuasion and manipulation? It runs through intention, method, and outcome. Persuasion offers reasons, evidence, and agency. Manipulation withholds, distorts, and corners. Persuasion uses fear as a light that reveals danger. Manipulation uses fear as a shadow that hides motives. Persuasion tells you the risk and what you can do about it. Manipulation tells you the nightmare and sells you the dream. If a message demands your panic but refuses your questions, if it shrinks your choices to one narrow tunnel, if it thrives on your humiliation or exhaustion, you are being handled, not helped. The ethical communicator welcomes the moment when a listener says, "Show me the numbers," or "What are the costs?" Because those questions signal a living mind, not a captured one. Designing messages that empower rather than paralyze is both science and art. The science says, pair severity with efficacy. Show the real stakes, then show a real step. Make the action specific, doable, and proportionate. The art says, speak with respect for the person's dignity. Tone carries more than content when fear is in the room. A voice that scolds produces defiance. A voice that catastrophizes produces avoidance. A voice that cares, steady, concrete, and unafraid of silence, produces attention that can move. Replace spectacle with clarity. Replace pressure with guidance. Replace or else with so that. And then stop. Ethical fear makes room for breath. It does not keep pumping the heart just to keep the eyes on the screen. Consider a public health message about a contagious illness. The manipulative version shouts worst-case scenarios, loops shocking images, and implies that noncompliance makes you a monster. The empowering version explains transmission in simple terms, names the most effective behaviors, gives timelines and resources, acknowledges uncertainty without drama, and thanks people for the effort they can realistically make. It does not promise control over what cannot be controlled. It teaches skill where skill matters. One approach produces compliance mixed with shame and fatigue. The other produces informed cooperation and the stamina to keep going. Or take cybersecurity. The unethical ad personalizes every breach into an inevitable home invasion of your life and suggests that only one product can save you. The ethical campaign shows common attack paths, teaches a few habits that block most threats, and helps you test them in minutes. The first makes you feel doomed without purchasing. The second makes you feel capable whether or not you buy. When in doubt, ask, after this message, does the listener become more skillful and free, or more scared and dependent? Ethics also asks us to check our own incentives. It is easy to believe that our cause is righteous, and therefore any method is justified. But the tools we use reshape the people we reach. If we teach them to move only when terror calls, we will need to keep them terrified, to keep them moving. If we teach them to act from understanding, they can continue without us. The ethical goal is to build capacity that outlives the campaign. That means tolerating a smaller spike in the short term for a stronger foundation in the long term. It means risking a quieter message that preserves trust rather than chasing a louder one that burns it. There is humility at the heart of ethical fear. It admits that the messenger is fallible. It invites correction and commits to updates. It is willing to say, "We were wrong," because accuracy is more important than pride. It feels awkward in a world built on certainty, but it pays back with credibility that cannot be faked. People remember who frightened them needlessly. They also remember who told them the hard thing without theatrics and stayed to help. For those who receive fear-based messages, ethics looks like discernment. Ask what the communicator stands to gain by your fear. Ask whether the call to action restores your agency or rents it. Ask whether the message survives contact with data, with time, and with stories beyond the single vivid example. You are allowed to question warnings and still be a responsible citizen. You are allowed to demand proportion. You are allowed to protect your attention from merchants of dread and give it to those who practice care. Ultimately, fear will always be part of how humans teach and learn. That is not a flaw. It is a recognition that we are embodied creatures whose safety systems are fast and strong. The ethical task is to treat those systems with respect. Use fear like a flare, bright enough to be seen, brief enough to prevent blindness, aimed where the danger truly is. Use it to point toward preparation, compassion, and competence. And when the lesson is learned, let the light go out so people can see the path again. As we close, hold this thought tenderly. Fear is a teacher, not a weapon. It can show you the edge and help you survive the turn. It can remind you that your life is precious and that other lives are too. But it cannot tell you who to hate, what to buy to become whole, or whom to obey without question. Those are choices we must refuse to outsource. If you speak to others, speak with the courage to be accurate and the patience to be kind. If you listen to others, listen with the strength to pause and the wisdom to ask for proof. Somewhere between alarm and apathy, there is a steady ground where warnings are heard, lives are protected, and trust is preserved. Stand there. From that ground, your words can save without scaring, lead without coercing, and turn fear back into what it was meant to be. A brief and honest signal on the way to a better choice. If this episode helped you quiet the noise of fear, subscribe to Dark Audio Vision and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next chapter. Tap like to boost the signal, and share this with someone who needs calm clarity today. Tell me in the comments, what fear has been stealing your attention lately, and what one small step will you take this week to reclaim it? I'll read every reply and pin the most insightful. For a deeper dive, the next episode is linked in the top comment and in the description. Let's not erase fear. Let's teach it where it belongs.